The wind cut across the plains like a blade, carrying dust, cold, and words people never said out loud. And when she whispered, "I'm not pretty," it sounded like a confession meant for the earth itself, not for the cowboy standing in front of her. But he heard it anyway, and what he said back would change both their lives forever. She stood with her hands folded tight, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the ground as if it had already judged her and found her lacking. People always did. In towns like Dry Creek, beauty was currency, and she had learned early that she did not possess enough of it to buy kindness, protection, or patience. The mirror had taught her that lesson before the people did. Her sharp cheekbones, her uneven smile, the faint scar along her jaw from a childhood fall no one bothered to treat gently. She wasn't ugly, not truly, but she wasn't the kind of pretty that made doors open or voices soften. And she knew it. The cowboy watched her quietly, hat low over his eyes, boots planted in the dirt as if the land itself had claimed him. He was broad-shouldered, weather-worn, with the kind of face that didn't smile often because it didn't need to. His name was Eli Mercer, and people in Dry Creek spoke it carefully. Some said he was cold. Others said he was broken. A few said he was dangerous. None of them said he was kind, mostly because they didn't know what to look for. "I'm not pretty," she repeated, softer this time, as if saying it once hadn't been enough to convince the world. "So if you're looking for," she stopped. There was no point finishing the sentence. Everyone knew how it ended. Eli tilted his head slightly, studying her like a man trying to understand a language he'd almost forgotten. Then he said, calm as a settled horse, "That's fine. I don't need fancy. I need honest." The words hit her harder than any insult ever had. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide and unsure, as if she'd misheard him. Men didn't say things like that. Not to women like her. Not without laughing afterward. But he didn't laugh. Her name was Clara Boone, and honesty was the only thing she'd ever had in abundance. She'd come to the ranch that morning because hunger had a way of stripping pride clean. The notice had been simple: help needed. Cooking. Cleaning. No nonsense. Pay weekly. Ask for Mercer. Most women passed it by. Working for Eli Mercer meant isolation, long days, and no promise of comfort. But Clara didn't have the luxury of choosing easy. Her father had died the previous winter, taken by a fever that came quick and left nothing behind but unpaid debts and a small, sagging house she'd been forced to sell for almost nothing. Her mother had gone years earlier, worn down by disappointment and silence. Clara was 24 and already tired in a way that didn't show on the outside, but it lived behind her eyes. When she reached the ranch, she'd expected questions. She'd prepared answers. She'd braced herself for that look men got when they decided whether a woman was worth listening to. Instead, Eli had just nodded once and asked, "Can you work?" "Yes," she said. "Can you tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable?" She hesitated, then nodded again. "That's all I know how to do." And now here they stood, the wind carrying that small, painful confession between them. Eli stepped aside and motioned toward the house. "Then you'll do just fine." The ranch wasn't grand. It was sturdy, the kind of place built to last, not to impress. Thick wooden beams. A porch that creaked but held firm, reminding you it had seen worse than time. Inside, everything had its place. No clutter. No decoration for decoration's sake. It felt like him. Clara worked hard. Harder than she ever had. Maybe harder than she needed to, because work was something she could control. She cooked meals that filled the room with warmth. She cleaned until the floors shone dull and honest, not polished. She mended clothes without being asked. She spoke when spoken to and stayed quiet when she wasn't sure she belonged in the conversation. Eli noticed everything. He didn't comment on most of it. Days passed, then weeks. The ranch settled into a rhythm that surprised them both. Mornings started early. Coffee brewed strong. Sometimes they ate together in silence, not awkward, just quiet. Sometimes he told her about the cattle, about the weather signs people no longer bothered to read. Sometimes she told him stories about her father, small, ordinary things that somehow mattered. People in town started to talk. They always did. They said she was after his land, that he'd hired her out of pity, that nothing good ever came from a woman who knew she wasn't pretty. Clara heard the whispers when she went into Dry Creek for supplies. She kept her head down. She always had. One afternoon, she came back to the ranch later than usual. Her hands were shaking. Eli saw it immediately. "What happened?" he asked. She tried to brush past him. "Nothing. That's not honest, he said, not unkindly. She stopped. They said I trapped you, she whispered. That you were too lonely to see it. Eli's jaw tightened. He waited a moment before speaking. And what do you think? She swallowed. I think I'm afraid you'll believe them. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she had to look at him. Clara, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name like that. I've been lonely, but I've never been stupid. Her eyes burned. That night, she cried quietly in her small room, embarrassed by the relief that hurt almost as much as the fear had. Eli hadn't always been this way, so reserved, so guarded. Years ago, he'd loved a woman who loved attention more than truth. She'd been beautiful in a way that made rooms turn. She'd laughed easily and lied even easier. When she left, she took half his savings and all his trust. He learned then that beauty could distract from rot. Clara didn't distract. She revealed. He liked that. One evening, a storm rolled in hard and fast. Thunder cracked the sky open. The cattle panicked. Eli rode out without hesitation. Clara watched from the porch, heart in her throat, rain soaking her dress as she waited. When he finally returned, soaked and exhausted, she ran to him without thinking. You're hurt, she said, seeing the blood on his arm. It's nothing. That's not honest, she shot back, and for the first time, he smiled. She cleaned the wound carefully, her fingers gentle, her face focused. He watched her the way a man watches something he didn't know he'd been missing. You're not invisible, he said suddenly. Her hand stilled. I've been invisible my whole life. Not to me. The words stayed with her long after the storm passed. But life doesn't soften just because two people find something real. Trouble came riding in on dust and resentment. A neighboring rancher, jealous of Eli's land and success, stirred rumors into something sharper. He claimed Eli was unfit to manage alone, that he was being manipulated. He brought it to the town council. Clara offered to leave. If I go, she said quietly, this stops. Eli looked at her like she'd suggested cutting off a limb. No, I don't want to ruin you, she said, voice breaking. You won't, he said. And even if it costs me something, I won't send you away just to make other people comfortable. No one had ever chosen her like that. The hearing was ugly. People spoke over her. About her. Never to her. Eli listened until he'd had enough. She told you she wasn't pretty, he said to the room, his voice steady. And you heard weak. I heard honest. She works harder than anyone I've ever hired. She tells the truth even when it costs her. If that scares you, that's your problem, not mine. Silence followed. Not approval, but something close to respect. They won. After that, things changed slowly. Not magically, not all at once. But the town learned to leave them alone. One night, months later, they sat on the porch watching the stars spill across the sky. Clara spoke without looking at him. I still don't think I'm pretty, she said. Eli took a long breath. I still don't need fancy. She smiled then, a real one, uneven and warm. And for the first time, she believed that maybe beauty wasn't something you had to prove. Maybe it was something that showed up when you stopped pretending to be someone else. They never married in a grand way. No crowds. No spectacle. Just a promise made at sunrise with dust on their boots and truth in their hands. And when people asked Eli later why he chose her, he always said the same thing. She was brave enough to be honest in a world addicted to pretty lies. And that, in the end, was more than enough.